The question is that this House do now adjourn. Laura Kyrke-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am so pleased to have the opportunity tonight to share my pride in the rural areas of my constituency of Aylesbury, to share my admiration for those who work on the land and care for it, and to set out how we can enable both our urban and rural communities and our natural environment to thrive. I'm grateful to the Minister for being here. I bring forward this debate in part to reassure my constituents of my own and my government's commitment to protecting our natural environment and safeguarding our agricultural land. This is a subject of debate in my constituency, as this new government takes forward the planning reforms that are so necessary for our future growth. But after 14 years of deep turbulence and decline with damaging consequences for nature and for our communities, I would also suggest a better way forward, rooted in clear principles, more predictability, and a dose of pragmatism. First, let me turn to how we protect and enhance our natural environment. And to give some context from my constituency, we're in a beautiful part of the country, including the Chiltern Hills and historic woodlands and waterways, with 14% of the constituency designated as greenbelt land. But we're also subject to extensive house building under the last government, more than 13,000 new homes and counting in the last 10 years, which has created great pressures on services and infrastructure, but also on our natural environment. My constituents understand the urgency of addressing our national housing crisis. The statistics speak for themselves. Nearly 1.3 million households on social housing waiting lists, including more than 6,000 households in Buckinghamshire. Young people under 30 today are less than half as likely to own a home than young adults in the 1990s. Equally, many of my constituents understand the need for investment in renewable energy, whether that's onshore wind or solar panels, to get us on track for clean, secure and more affordable power by 2030. But they and I are conscious of the tension between the need for planning reform, whether that's to build houses or energy or other infrastructure, and the need to protect our natural environment. So how do we navigate that tension? I'd like to make 3 points based on Aylesbury's experience. First, we need to ensure that clear environmental safeguards are embedded in planning policy. To this end, the proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework are strong. For example, the emphasis on a brownfield-first approach, using previously developed land for new housing and therefore protecting green spaces. The introduction of grey-belt land, which of course needs tight definition, but ultimately should enable a more strategic approach to building on certain types of green space. And the golden rules in the MPPF, of course, that ensure that any greenbelt building will bring benefits for nature and for community access to green space. This will be a welcome contrast to the haphazard raids on greenbelt and greenfield sites under the last government. In Buckinghamshire as a whole, for example, 11% of new residential addresses between 2019 and 2022 were built in designated areas of outstanding natural beauty, compared to a 4% national average. So this building has been happening, and my constituents tell me the rationale for it hasn't always been clear. Second, we need to learn from pockets of good practice where they do exist. I can point to one example in Aylesbury, the Kingsbrook development on the edge of town, where housing and nature now coexist well. Kingsbrook was built in conjunction with the RSPB, and it includes 250 acres of wildlife-rich open space with hedgehog highways and community allotments. I'd invite the government to visit and learn from examples like this. And where it isn't possible for developments to include this much green space, we need to ensure there is ready access to nature nearby. As an Aylesbury Ramblers Association member recently reminded me as he spoke about his battle with the council to keep footpaths in and out of Aylesbury clear. And third, of course, it's vital that where nature must be protected, we do this, and we don't just protect, but we strengthen and enhance it. I've seen wonderful examples of this in my constituency. The work that the Chiltern Society does with their 700 volunteers, for example, to sow wildflowers or to clear more than 30,000 metres of footpaths and 2,000 miles of cycle paths and bridle paths in the last year alone. But in recent years, it's felt like they're working against, not with, the successive governments that have shown very little regard for nature. This is perhaps best exemplified in my constituency by the release of sewage into the rivers, 3,000 hours last year alone, with devastating consequences for nature. I'm pleased by the early work of our government to review the Environmental Improvement Plan, paving the way, we hope, towards the ambitious global goal of safeguarding 30% of our land and sea by 2030. But of course, this is just the start, and the test will be whether these safeguards are indeed in place in constituencies like Aylesbury across the country. Now, let me turn to our agricultural land. Of course, the NPPF rightly contains protections for the best and most versatile agricultural land too. But ultimately, protecting and strengthening agricultural land means supporting the farmers who steward and manage it. I've spoken to many farmers in my constituency, including at a brilliant visit to Ledburn Farm on the Ascot estate, a producer of the wheat for my kids' Weetabix. I know farmers have been under great pressure in recent years from weather events, disease, economic volatility, Brexit, rising energy costs, rising rural crime, you name it. But I also know they work incredibly hard to keep putting food on our tables. I will.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Lady for Aylesbury for bringing this forward? And she's absolutely right to highlight the issue for farmers. The member may not be aware that my constituency is one of the few rich agricultural land areas that can produce 3 potato crops a year. It is essential that we ensure that farmers can and do make the most of this possibility, not simply in lush Strangford and my constituency, but also in Aylesbury and across this great United Kingdom. Does the Honourable Lady not agree that we need a DEFRA to be engaged with grassroots farming to support farmers and ease the way and thereby ensure that we increase food security within the United Kingdom and at the same time protect our agricultural land? The Minister's in place, no better person to do just that.
Thank you, and I do agree that supporting smallholder farmers is absolutely essential. And there's too much to say really on this in the time that we have tonight. But I wanted to pull out 3 particularly important ways to help set up our farmers for success. First and foremost, we have to ensure the long-term financial sustainability of British farming. I know, for example, that the environment land management schemes have been unclear and difficult to navigate and poorly tailored to different contexts. In the case of Ledburn Farm, the heavy clay land. And as a result, the uptake has been low. But farmers remain in need of this support, and we have to find a way to make it easier to access. Equally, farmers are forging ahead and finding ways to diversify their income, but there's much more we can do to support this too. For example, making it much easier to change the use of existing farm buildings or to develop lower grade agricultural land if it creates renewable energy sources or affordable housing for farm workers, for example. Second, we have to promote and support farmers to roll out sustainable farming practices that address challenges like soil erosion or low land productivity. For example, by supporting the farmer clusters that have become increasingly prevalent across Buckinghamshire, which bring together farmers to help explore best practice and share ideas for enhancing natural habitats on their land. And third, we need to invest in the next generation of British farmers. This means ensuring that we give the profession the status that it deserves in the first place, and that we start educating children about it at a very young age. This means creating pathways into the farming sector, for example, through investing in specialist technical education and expanding agriculture apprenticeships. It means making it not just attractive, but affordable to live in rural communities and to pursue a career in farming, particularly in somewhere like Buckinghamshire, where there's far too little affordable rural housing and services, and the pull to towns is too strong as a result. In short, we can put all the necessary protections in place for quality agricultural land, and I'm confident we will, but without a thriving farming sector to safeguard that land, it will have little impact. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituency has suffered from the absence of a coherent strategy for our land, where and how we protect it, where and how we use it, where and how we develop it. Recent governments have left nature depleted, farmers deeply uncertain at best and out of business already at worst, and communities frustrated by haphazard house building without access to green spaces or infrastructure or services. Under this government, the future has to look different. We have to start with clear principles, and alongside the NPPF, the new land use framework will surely help, ensuring that we get that right balance between food production, nature, and economic growth. We need more predictability. Of course, external shocks will happen, but the role of government is to be a steadying force. It's great that we've got to work quickly on the first steps, whether that's planning reform or setting up GB Energy, and I think we can look forward to a steady, focused rollout. And finally, we need a good deal of pragmatism and acceptance that getting the balance right between development and environmental protection isn't easy, and there will be compromises, but it's necessary. We have to find a way to both build the homes and infrastructure of the future and protect and regenerate our agricultural and nature-rich lands, because ultimately one cannot exist without the other. Thank you.